Hi, everyone, and welcome back to EBnet.Stream. This week, we saw the launch of the Mercer CFA Global Pensions Index, which is a key piece of research that is done around the world on pension systems and often used by our community for research and reference purposes when talking to clients. I thought I'd touch base with Belinda Sullivan, who is the head of corporate consulting strategy at Alexforbes, and get a little bit of her insights into this year's findings. So welcome to EBnet.Stream, Belinda.
Good morning. Thanks, Natalie. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to have you. I wonder if we could start just by setting the scene of what this piece of research actually is intended to do.
So first of all, Natalie, it's important because it looks at the world retirement system. So different retirement systems across the world, benchmarks them, and essentially looking at 52 countries. So in 2025, we've added 4 more countries, and that represents around 65% of the world's population. So it evaluates each retirement system across different sub-indices, as they call them. And first of all, it looks at adequacy. So are retirees receiving enough income for a dignified retirement? We then go and look at sustainability. So can the system that they're in deliver benefits over the long term? And then from an integrity perspective, is the system well governed? Is it transparent? Is it trusted? And then it also importantly looks at specific needs around being able to balance immediate needs with long-term sustainability and obviously trust in the system from people across the world.
For those people who are watching us chatting and listening to us today, if they haven't read the report that we've put onto our publications podium, what would you say the kind of 3 or 4 highlights are that they need to be aware of?
So before I step into that, I just wanted to highlight that there's a grading system that they use based on those sub-indices. And essentially the overall grade is from an A grade, which is our top end, all the way down to a C grade. And what it really looks at is the features of these systems and any major shortcomings that can be identified in the system itself. And with that, it's really basically looking at the World Economic Forum. So how do we improve outcomes? Do we look at support to the elderly? What is happening from a public sector environment? What is happening in the private pension environment? How does government step into advocate essentially to promote benefits for the public, as well as making sure that in the pension fund or the private pension environment that there are sufficient laws in order to promote and improve outcomes for individuals and Joe public in terms of the broader spectrum.
Okay, so what we're basically doing is we're looking at the world, and we are, I don't want to say ranking because it's not a ranking, it is a ranking, but we're scoring, let's call it scoring, the retirement fund systems in various countries. Is that a fair kind of summary of what this survey does?
Correct. So it's looking at the level of benefits the system designs. And like I've highlighted, there are public retirement systems. So countries that have a really mature public retirement system, while the private pension industry is starting to take off. And then we're looking at countries like South Africa, where we've got a really mature private pension system, and how we look at, how do we take care of public? So they look at the coverage of the systems. So who is covered by the respective public and private systems? What sort of government support is then included in the management of the pensions legislation and regulatory environment? And then in terms of growth in assets, how is the retirement savings percentage increasing over time from a world sort of GDP perspective in terms of encouraging savings?
So let's deal with the world concept first, but before we bring it home and look at the South African specifics, perhaps you could highlight the kind of top two or three, the kind of highest ranked or the highest scored systems, and maybe highlight for us why they are regarded so highly.
So naturally, the top systems are Netherlands, Iceland, Denmark, and newly incorporated in there is the likes of Singapore, as well as Israel. And these really have robust retirement systems that are seen to deliver good scores across the various indices that I spoke about. So in terms of adequacy, they are seeing that members will receive an adequate income in retirement, that the system that is supporting that is sustainable in terms of being able to provide benefits to the members over the long term. So it's not just about meeting benefits today, but that the system is able to continue to support the system overall. And then integrity. So there's high levels of trust. These systems are well governed. There's transparency in terms of how they are governed. And with that, from a trusting perspective, most of these individual countries have scored top levels, so A's or a B plus, depending on the type of indice and where they are better suited. So if we look at, for example, Netherlands, if I take them as an example, they scored A's throughout. So from an adequacy, sustainability, and integrity perspective, and the same with the likes of Denmark. So you're seeing those countries coming in very strongly in terms of their current systems, bearing in mind that all these top countries are essentially looking at public retirement system as opposed to our private retirement system in South Africa.
Okay. I noticed that you didn't say Australia in the list of countries that you listed. And I know that the Actuarial Society is looking at Australia. I mean, I know that the regulators, in fact, are looking at some of the systems and solutions that Australia has put in place. Perhaps comment on where Australia is?
So Australia ranked a B plus, which is still really good. It's directly behind the A levels in the system itself. And just to give you an indication, I think they ranked highly in terms of the integrity and the sustainability perspective. But in terms of adequacy, they rated a B, which gave them the B plus score.
Okay.
So I think there's obviously some more to do in terms of long-term adequacy in terms of the Australian system as well.
Let's bring it home to South Africa. So perhaps you can share with us how we graded and put that in the context of what we've discussed up to now.
So South Africa received a C grading, which might not sound fantastic, but it is definitely a step up from our D grading that we received last year. And the reason for that, let me start with our overall score. So they ranked out of 100, was 51 this year versus a 49.6%, of 49.6 into 2024. While that doesn't sound like a huge leap, we have seen that there has been a significant change in terms of the measurement from an adequacy perspective. So last year we ranked 34.7 for adequacy, and this year it's gone up to 38. And, you know, when we start looking at the reasons for the change in the score, it is really primarily as a result of the introduction of the two-pot system in September last year.
Okay, so we're a C, and you've spoken about the one kind of sub-index. The other two?
So the other two, in terms of sustainability, from a sustainability perspective, we're sitting at a D rating, which isn't ideal, but it is not the bottom. And I do see that once we start looking at the long-term trends in terms of two-pot and some other changes within our overall system, we should start seeing an improvement in sustainability. I just want to bring it a step back before I look at integrity. When we're measuring sustainability and the adequacy and overall system as a whole, bearing in mind that the improvement in our adequacy, the improvement in our school is really looking at our occupational funds, because that's where all of this is driven from a South African perspective. So the reason our scoring from a sustainability perspective or an adequacy perspective isn't topping the charts now because of the introduction of two-part with compulsory preservation, there are areas that are of concern in that we do not have retirement funds as a compulsory requirement for employers to introduce for their employees. So not everyone has access to the occupational retirement funds. And also we don't have a national savings solution yet. We do have the state older age pension, which obviously doesn't meet all requirements. So if we look at sustainability, is there a large room for improvement? Definitely. And we do see that that has to change over time in order to bring more people, more South Africans into the net in order to give them long-term benefits in retirement. From an integrity perspective, you know, if we look at retirement fund governance in South Africa, you know, we've got a very trusted system, especially from an occupational perspective. It's well governed. Our regulator, I mean, we've seen scores. I think you spent a lot of your time looking at regulatory changes and the retirement landscape. And we see that coming through in the integrity score, where we actually score a B+, which, you know, if we go back to Australia's total score, we're sitting there and thereabouts in terms of their integrity scoring as well.
EBnet is proud to bring you top quality content from experts across the financial services industry in South Africa and internationally for free. Your support helps us in doing this. All we ask is that you subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. Share this video with others you think will benefit from it, and give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content. That way you help us help you. Thank you from the team at EBnet. For more great content, please visit www.EBnet.co.za.
So it's lovely to hear that. And from an occupational fund point of view, definitely. I mean, our systems are robust. Our governance and compliance frameworks and legislative frameworks is what I want to say are in place and working. And so that's definitely in our favor. But let's look back to the sustainability conversation and word and measurement. When you say sustainability, I kind of think sustainable investing. I know that some of the sentiment around this particular issuance or issue of the Global Pensions Index talks about governments and their kind of noticing of pension fund assets and the ability to use those to further government imperatives and government or national priorities, I think is the words that we used.
Yeah.
Is that sustainability the same sustainability, or are we talking coverage and infrastructure, or kind of, if you could separate that for me perhaps a bit?
So I think if we first of all look at sustainability in the context of the survey, as I said, it highlights, you know, can the system develop benefits over the long term? Now, if we bring back to sustainability in the context of environmental, social, and governance, which is broader than just investments, we want to make sure that our funds are robust in the way that they are designed. So in other words, that they are able to cater not only for members today, but those that are going to future generations of members that join funds. So if we look at that from a sustainability perspective, that's essentially where we want to get to, from ensuring that we can achieve and maintain benefits for people over their lifetime and new people that start entering into the system. From the discussion around the investments, I think what it looks at in the context of, you know, how do we as sort of corporate citizens and have this ability to be able to make changes is really looking at, how do we invest this money that we get for retirement funds to not only give return of benefit, but also to create impact so that it creates a difference in the environment. So when I am looking at the sustainable benefits for members, I'm not only looking at the design of the benefit for them to be able to participate in the retirement fund, but we also want to ensure that those members who retire in 10, 15 or 30, even 50 years time have a world that they can retire into. And that's essentially where the discussion around global responsibility and how do we use this money for good as well in terms of impact investing. And we see a lot of changes, for example, in the UK, where they are moving towards saying there has to be some sort of demarcated infrastructure investment in the UK itself, and other countries also starting to look at that. So just to take a step, Natalie, this year, I think the OECD highlighted that retirement assets grew by 10%, reaching an amount of, and it's staggering, $63.1 trillion. That's the retirement industry assets across the world. And that's more than tripled since 2003. And while we all sit in this environment where we see our market uncertainty, that drive has actually been due to stronger equity markets, steady contributions coming in. So there is this long-term view that there's an upward trend for global retirement savings. And how do we look at this expanse of money to use responsibly in the different economic systems to actually promote infrastructure and to make sure that we give people a world that they can actually retire into.
It's such a fantastic perspective that you give there. We very often are very much involved in our own little funds and our own little world. But when you look at the influence that these financial institutions have, both locally in our own country, but then also worldwide, it's certainly becoming quite a powerful force in the narrative.
100%. And I think just in terms of the reviewing, when we look at the Economic Forum as well, and they're looking at long-term reforms and the effectiveness of retirement income, they're looking at how are countries expanding coverage, how are you reducing leakage, how are you improving governance, increasing state old age pensions, promoting higher participation in saving. And that's all about encouraging people to save and to have trust in an environment that they can invest in, that they can live in as part of their communities, and also receive an income and have dignity in retirement one day.
I'm going to ask you a question to wrap up our conversation that perhaps is slightly unfair. But if you had to look at our current position as a local industry, so South Africa's pension system, if you could pull one lever that could get us from a C to a B, which would you choose and why?
Sure. That is definitely a tough question, but Natalie, I think one of the key things in our South African environment is that we need to look at how we can expand coverage to all South Africans, and how we then look at our informal workers, because we definitely have people out there that are earning and making a living, but not having any way to effectively save for retirement. In addition to that, making sure that we expand the sort of length and breadth of our occupational footprint in terms of the pension scheme. So we have the facility to be able to get more people into the net, into the savings net, and getting people to trust the system and understand the rationale for why they need to be part of a retirement savings system. And for me, I think that if we can expand the coverage, if we can make sure that people have benefits in retirement and, as I said, able to spend money in their communities, which then promotes community upliftment. They have a dignified retirement. They're able to earn income in retirement. I think that is a key aspect for me, because that contributes not only to their communities, so we have a sort of reciprocal benefit, because the communities are succeeding and being uplifted by the money that gets spent there. It has a corresponding impact on our macroeconomy, so improving the buying power and the overall for our economy as a whole. And I think that's something that is extremely important from my perspective. So just expanding coverage, and also just touching on bringing in your poorest of the poor in there to make sure that over time that they are also part of this savings, that they're not just getting 1,700 Rand as an example per month, but are able to benefit far, as part of far greater construct than they are currently.
I think for me, it certainly brings the link together between the conversation on auto enrollment, the conversation on sustainable investing, and how those two, I'm going to call them quite big dots on the radar right now. They're very big conversations that are unfolding, but it certainly brings it into perspective when you know what the international and global system is doing. Sometimes I think we sit here in the southern tip of Africa and think, oh, nobody really notices us. But when it comes to our retirement industry, we are pretty much a player. I mean, is that a fair comment?
I think it is a fair comment. And I think one of the key things to highlight is that when we're looking at the Global Pension Index, the full survey and the discussion around that, you'll see, as I've highlighted before, a lot of the players that are sitting at the top have robust public retirement systems. However, they're now looking to introduce defined contribution, and how they then build this and get people to start taking ownership of their savings as well from a personal perspective, which is where we are really mature. So we're sort of on this other, if we had to go and tilt everything upside down, we're sitting on the side where we have this robust DB system that we've come through, and now shifted into defined contribution. We're in an environment where we have to educate people around, so you're contributing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have enough money in retirement. And I think with Two-Pot, understanding that we now have this element of compulsory preservation is a great plus for us, and that should over time, and in terms of trends, improve our ranking. But we also need to come back to the fact that if I'm contributing 5%, and I'm only preserving 2/3 of that over my lifetime, I'm still not going to get to that full need. So it comes down to education and communication and financial literacy, which is key in any environment, whether people are sitting in an occupational environment or if it's people who are reliant on the state. You have to educate and communicate with people so that there's an understanding of what what tomorrow may look like if you don't take action today. And I think that's critical for people in our environment.
Yeah, it's certainly something that is echoed. And it's funny, I always say when something is said with an American accent, suddenly it feels like it has a lot more authority. But I was sitting in a webinar the other day, and one of the guest speakers was an American lady, very, very experienced in global pensions and managing global pensions. And she was saying exactly what you are saying. The communication and really an education imperative is so right up there in terms of priorities. Whether you're looking at the States, whether you're looking at these Nordic regions that have scored so well on this index, or whether you're looking at Australia, everyone's grappling with this. And suddenly you kind of go, okay, we're not backward, right? We are dealing with the same issues. So it's really encouraging. And the Global Pensions Index really showed that, and showed the I want to say, the progress that we've made.
Yes.
And we've all been part of that, right? Two-pot was a nightmare, and yet very successfully implemented, and hopefully sets the scene for further implementation of great initiatives.
Definitely, Natalie. And I think, you know, you said something quite true there. I mean, it's education and realizing it from a global landscape, that's what is imperative. I think coming back to making sure that, you know, you don't wait till you're 30 or 40 to become educated about saving for money. It starts at home. It starts with families talking about money. I think one of the key things they also highlight in the Global Pension Index is, from a World Economic Forum perspective, is the gender gap being also a huge issue in terms of single parents, in terms of males and females, ladies going off and spending time to look after their children and missing out on that savings period. So understanding and empowering people to make good financial decisions starts from a young age. And I think, you know, I think over time we've learned this. We're in a DC environment where people realize their parents didn't save enough. So we're in the sandwich generation. Or as I said to someone the other day, sometimes it feels and looks like it's a bit of a Dagwood sandwich. There's so many layers into people reliant on others that I think if we start empowering the youngsters coming through, especially the youngsters in our environment who will only know two-pot, to understand the implications and consequences of decisions they take today on their future selves. And, you know, it's that sobering moment where you go onto an aging app and suddenly you take a photo and you realize, if you're looking at that person, what would you have done differently, and how to now bring it back and share that knowledge with the youngsters coming through as well. So education in schools, I think, is critical, as we learn and are able to share across the global environment, as we've done through the Global Pension Index, as to how important that is.
Thank you, Belinda, as always, for sharing your insights with us. It's lovely to get a perspective and to understand the research and the reports that are shared with the community in a context. And so thank you for bringing that to life for us today.
A pleasure. Thank you, Natalie, for having me.